Skeletal muscle cells are striated and they are also multinucleated. So they have these striations, and we are going to get to what these striations are. And so they have striations and are multinucleated. What does that mean? That means that they have more than one nucleus. So most of our cells in the body have just a single nucleus. And so to explain why these skeletal muscles are multinucleated is how they develop. And so they develop by the fusion of multiple cells. And this explains, for example, how long a skeletal muscle cell can get. It's not the longest cell. Your neurons are longer in length, but they can become long because of the fusion of many cells. So during development, stem cells fuse together. And so it's kind of interesting when we talk about building muscles, building muscle tissue. How do you add muscles if embryonically you're producing them? And so we'll talk about that. One idea is that we do have stem cells, a few stem cells in our muscle tissue. So if I wanted to get really big muscles, maybe those stem cells would fuse to produce more muscle cells. But also we'll talk about how the muscle cell itself could increase in diameter. So the cell could actually get small in diameter or increase in diameter. And that is maybe how we increase muscle mass. Another interesting idea is that when we weight lift, we sometimes cause a little tears in the muscle cells themselves in the muscle. And that tearing of the muscle cell, where you tear one muscle cell into two, actually might be able to increase the number of cells that you have in your body. So each one becomes its own cell. And so you would increase muscle mass. Okay, so let's look at the organelles that are inside of your muscle cell. So we have what are called myofibrils. And anytime you see like myo or sarco, you know you're talking about muscles. So like when I talk about myofascia, we're talking about connective tissue around the muscles. When we talk about, what would be a good example of sarco? Sarcophagus means flesh. So sarco means flesh. So we have like sarcomeres in our muscle cells. Okay. So myofibrils, these are organelles that contain the myofilaments called actin and myosin. Now, these are proteins. Actin and myosin are proteins, which kind of explains why our muscle is a good source of protein, right? When we eat organisms, we generally eat their skeletal muscle because it's high in protein. So the actin and the myosin are the filaments that are actually going to cause contraction. And so that's why our cells are filled with them. We also have mitochondria. And if you remember from when you first studied cell biology, some people call this the powerhouse of the cell. The mitochondria produce ATP. We'll talk about the role of ATP in muscle contraction from sugar, which is glucose. So primarily glucose is the fuel that we use to power the production of ATP, which then powers muscle contraction. So let's look at a diagram of the muscle cells. So you remember that the muscle cells are called muscle fibers. Individual muscle fibers, they have an outer membrane around them. We'll talk about that, cellular membrane. But what are these? These are they're like forcing the nucleus up to the sides of the cell. So when we look at these right here, these are the organelles called myofibrils. They are filled with myofilaments. The myofilaments are arranged in a particular order. We're going to talk about that in the next lecture, that are the actin and the myosin. So the actin and the myosin are the thick and the thin filaments in this diagram. So the arrangement of these actin and myosin is the reason why skeletal muscle looks striated. And it's not that smooth muscle, which is unstriated. Smooth muscle also has actin and myosin. It's just not arranged in the same way. So it doesn't look striated, but it still has actin and myosin in it. So all muscle has actin and myosin present in it. Those are called myofilaments. They are the filaments that explain muscle contraction. So we'll talk about that in another lecture.